audio, so we'll just go ahead and start recording. All right, so right now we're on the record, everyone. So, okay, so you guys know what to do, right? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and just quickly do a real quick opening, and then move on to introduce the panel members, and then go on with the questions. And I guess I'll you feel free to jump in, and also I guess we'll kind of just naturally see who's going to take the mic and go, and then if there's a direct question, I'll go ahead and direct it at you guys directly. Okay, are you guys all ready?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. And thank you for joining us today on Axe Radio, Cali FM 106.3 HD2. And today we are joined by four panelists who are joining us to express their thoughts on this special discussion on anti-Asian hate and violence today. Okay, so people who've grown up in the Los Angeles area, I mean, most of us who are in our 40s and 50s, we've experienced the 90s and also the tumultuous 80s, and that'll tell you that this racism and anti-Asian hate is really nothing new to many of us. In 1992, we saw the peak of racial tensions, which directly affected Korean Americans, and both directly and indirectly affected other Asian Americans as well. Now, we've been there and been going through some form of passive aggressive racism, even from the mainstream media, and even for the last 2 decades or so, we were facing mainstream media saying just little sly little slanted eye pokes at us and here and there, and we just kind of go over it. And these little things, it seems to have built up. Now, things seem to be taking a turn for the worst and toward more violent attacks, and Asian Americans are afraid of what's happening. And to have an honest and productive discussion regarding this matter, we are joined by the panelists, and I will go ahead and introduce them right now. We have Tam Nguyen, founder of Nailing It for America and president of Advanced Beauty College, joining us, and Alexander Kim. Well, let's first say hello. Hello, Tam.
Yes. Hello. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here to discuss this timely and relevant topic. And it's an honor to be on this panel of such well-respected leaders and Asian American leaders that I've had the opportunity to work with throughout not only this year, but in years past. Thank you.
And we definitely appreciate you taking out your time, taking time out of your schedule and joining us for this. It is a strange times indeed. I never thought I would see things escalate to this point, but it is kind of urgent, I think. And Alexander Kim, District Director, California Assembly 74. Alex?
Hey, Greg Young. It's a pleasure to be joined with an esteemed panel of guests. I've worked with each one of them individually, and it's great to be in a position working for the state of California, along with these other civic and community leaders. And it shows and demonstrates that Asian Americans are in definitely key positions where we can make a difference. However, the challenge still lies ahead because we still have, at least in terms of numbers, Asian Americans are still lacking in these types of positions, especially in government. We need more Asian Americans to run for office, and also be more involved in the intersectionality with other minority groups as well. So we'll discuss that further.
All right, Alex, and we'll be back with that more. And Tammy Kim, City Council member and Vice Mayor, City of Irvine, joins us, and one of those Asian American representatives. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, and thanks for having me here. And I guess I'll be speaking on behalf of Asian American women everywhere. So thank you.
Perfect. And Steve Kang, Vice President of Korean Federation of Los Angeles and Director of the KYCC. I've benefited many times from the KYCC organization when I was veered off in a weird direction in my tumultuous days as well. Steve, hi.
Hi, Young. So nice to see you again. Thank you for the invitation. And, thank you for mentioning KYCC. We're doing good work in the community, but I think it's it's time for us to really talk about the representation issue related to anti-Asian hate. So thank you.
Okay, guys, just give me 1 second because I really want to get this out there because we've been talking about how esteemed this panel is, and we've also been recognizing each other, and all of these people are peers that work in the community together. And let me take some time out to introduce each and every one of you, like more directly in my words. Tam Nguyen is the president and second generation co-owner of Advanced Beauty College with campuses in Garden Grove and Laguna Hills, California. Like 40,000 graduates have gone through the programs offered by this 33-year institution. And the majority of these graduates, they are employed in the beauty care industry, and many have moved on to successful business as successful business owners as well. And Tam is also an active member of the community. His leadership and experience in the community range from vice chair of OC United Way, co-chair of Cultures United, and much more. And also Alexander Kim, Assemblywoman Kati Petri Norris has hired Alexander Kim as her new district director. Mr. Kim has been serving as a community liaison based out of the Assemblywoman's Irvine office, and 20 years of experience. Alexander has represented local and state elected officials and worked in the private sector, has a very good understanding of what's happening in the community in the Southern California area as a whole, and has a deep rooted history in Southern California. Even before I met him through some of the work I've always known of him, through various, platforms. And also, Tammy Kim was elected to the city council in November 2020 with a historic win, beating out 13 other candidates to take first place. And she won her seat with more than 43,700 votes, which was the highest vote count for any city council candidate in the city's history. So you see the big support behind Tammy. And Tammy's a mother, a nonprofit leader, no stranger to community service, and also an advocate for small business as well as, executives. So she's well respected as a civic leader, and she's joining us today as well. And last but definitely not least, Steve Kang. He's the Director of External Affairs at the KYCC at the Koreatown Youth and Community Center, and also a current affairs anchor at KBS America, a district director, executive director, has really put his life and service into the public sector many a time. So thank you all for joining us. I know that was long, so I'll shut up now, okay? All right, once again, you guys are joining us on Axe Radio. It's a special discussion on anti-Asian hate and violence. And I am Young Kim. You're listening to Cali FM 106.3 HD2. And let's talk about this a little bit. There has been an influx in reporting of violence and hate crimes, and there's been more media coverage. I think some of us can say that it's always been there, but it was never covered. It was just kind of glossed over. But now there's definitely a lot more media coverage, which I think is more representative in the last 20 years that I've seen in many ways. What are your thoughts on what's happening and why this is happening in the media and it's become a major issue lately? Why now? Tammy, you want to start it off, or yeah, go ahead, Tam.
Okay, so I think really right now we've really come at a crossroads. I think why we're hearing a lot of this is simply because we have a lot more Asian American journalists that are bringing this to the forefront. And without these Asian American journalists, honestly, we wouldn't be hearing anything. And I truly believe this. So from the very beginning, we've had reporters such as Josie Huang from LAist, in LA, as well as several network reporters, on NBC, ABC, CBS. And if it weren't for them, I don't really think we would be hearing this. So that's what I have to add to this. And if anyone has any more to add.
Well, let me just ask you a question, Tammy. I mean, what are your thoughts? Are we seeing more Asian American attacks right now after this COVID pandemic and all this China virus, this and that by the former president and all that? Are we seeing more right now, or is this something that we've been facing and it's being brought to the limelight?
I think it's both. It's never ended. We've always been perpetual foreigners. I know growing up for me, it was very common to have my home vandalized, to, be bullied. So that's not uncommon. Even here in California, you see this in the form of microaggressions. You see this in the form of the bamboo ceiling in corporate America. And you see this in the form of where we stand politically. But I think right now, in this time, with the last president we just had more of a sense of emboldenedness. I mean, yellow fever has always existed. Xenophobia has existed, but it's now out in the open. And there's a sense of feeling empowered and emboldened to have racist attacks against Asian Americans or racial slurs or telling us to go back to where we came from. So it's just out in public now.
It gets so old though, right? But for us, we're just like,
It
okay,
does.
right? All
Yeah.
right. Tam, do you want to add something to that?
Sure. No, thank you, Young, again for having me. I think the only thing I'd want to add in terms of the influx for the reporting of Asian Americans, for Nailing It for America, we came together as 5 Orange County Asian American professionals, and we did so much work in partnering with our salon industry. So all of our brothers and sisters in the salon industry, we gave back so much. We gave back to the tune of 1.2 million personal protective equipment. We made sacrifices. We partnered up with Asian American owned restaurants throughout Southern California, and then sparked a movement nationwide just to the tune of 70,000 gourmet Asian meals. What we were able to do during that time, not knowing what we had, we were just going to the most vulnerable. And at that time, it was our frontline healthcare workers. Little did we know here, a year later, that we'd be dealing with anti-Asian hate after sacrificing and giving so much. Fortunately, on the Nailing It team, we do have PR and professionals who are Asian American, who are many of the interns over the last 2 decades are Asian Americans working in mainstream media with NBC, ABC, CBS, LA Times, etc. Because of that, we were able to immediately leverage existing relationships, mentorships to get on media. In fact, days after the Atlanta shooting of what happened, we had Tammy Kim, we had Alex Kim join us, along with our Orange County District Attorney, Orange County Supervisor's Office, many other elected officials and mayors and council members from other surrounding cities throughout. We were able to get a slew of media and great coverage, and since then we've continued to ride that momentum of media to the tunes of we've been either organized or attended 8 vigils, rallies in regards to anti-Asian hate, and we just continue that momentum in making sure that our voices are amplified as a united Asian American community regarding this.
All right, Tam. Steve, do you want to give us your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with both Tammy and Tam's assessment too, but during the pandemic, I think it was definitely exacerbated. And the recent statistics have really alarmed folks, not just within the AAPI sphere, but across this country. So if you look at the statistics currently from the hate crime from 2019 to 2020, you have an 833% increase in New York City. Here in Los Angeles, where I'm based out of, we have a 114% increase. Philadelphia is seeing 200% increase, San Jose 150% increases. So these are not normal. Yes, I agree that these incidences were always there. We've known about it, we've experienced it firsthand, many of us, but for the general public, I think they were just alarmed by this 100 plus percentages of increases from year to year.
So you're touching up on the increase. That's actually my follow-up question. But before I get to that, let me get to Alex and then hear his thoughts on what the original question was, which was also regarding with media. But overall, I mean, is this a real increase, and what's happening? What's going on right now, Alex?
Yeah.
And you have ears and feelers everywhere in K-Town and all the towns out there. So
Sure.
why don't you tell us what's up?
And let me just bring a few points just from the state level. AAPI's Asian American Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing immigrant community in California. More than the Latino community in terms of birth rate. It's not just even immigration. And because of that, and the question you asked about why this is happening, I agree on all points from the other speakers. It's a combination of more media awareness, the spouting of hate from the prior presidential administration, blaming COVID upon Chinese Americans, and all these things, even the economic troubles caused by the COVID closures, protocol of enforcement, natural transference of this hate upon that. So, in terms of what the state has been doing, our Assembly Member Kari Pichinor has been working closely together with the API caucus. That's a group of legislators of Asian American descent in the state capitol. They introduced HR 23, which was a House resolution to denounce hate crimes and hateful rhetoric against AAPI communities, and making sure that they feel safe. I mean, the Pew Research Center is announced that they have about 31% of Asian Americans reporting hate crimes and discrimination upon them ever since the beginning of the COVID-19 epidemic. And the state, it's not enough, but the legislature took action to approve $1.4 million to create a website called stopaapihate.org. It's a way to report hate crimes specifically upon the AAPI communities. It's not enough, but it's something that's important because it provides multilingual resources, right? And not just in English, you could report it if you're in various different API languages. So that answered that part. In terms of my personal involvement, all of us, we've discriminated, different types of discrimination, ever since I was a kid. I've always lived, in a lot of stories you hear, I was the only Asian American kid in the communities in LA where I was born at. That's how I learned Spanish, because everybody was speaking Spanish around our Latino brothers and sisters in there. And well, you get picked on, you're being different. I was called Chino all the time. I always explain politely, I'm actually Korean. Soy Coreano, not Chino. And and then moving, as my parents moved around quite a bit, as we were immigrant communities and moving to the suburbs of Orange County from LA, where there's a good mixture of folks, and getting called on by the Caucasian community for the same thing, gook, chink, nip, everything. It's something that, you carry upon your shoulders, and the reason why a lot of us actually are involved in the community, either through the public sector or the private sector, right? Because we want to defend those people that have experienced the same type of things. Now it's at an extreme rhetoric pace, and the media is aware of things, and physical harm is being, physical harm and death upon our community members. So that's something that is very concerning, and we're discussing about.
Yeah, Steve, let me just go back to you, because you mentioned the increase. Yeah, it's been increasing, and it's been more reportings that's been happening. I think it's a combination of many different sides. But why do you think there is an increase right now? What are your thoughts? I mean, is it COVID, or are we just like the people to take it out on? What do you think?
I think it is definitely a combination. The pandemic, I think a lot of folks are just frustrated about the virus, about the pandemic, being locked up in their homes, not being able to do things that we're used to doing. And many of our panelists touched this, but our former president did, associate our new livelihood with, China, with Chinese Americans, with other Asian Americans. And I feel like that has emboldened certain sectors of the population to take that out on the AAPI community. And for many years, we've been sort of the scapegoat. We've been the easy target because we haven't made as much of a noise compared to other minority communities. Yeah. And I think you're seeing that now. And I think because of the coverage too, most recent attacks have been targeting a lot of our elders. And when you attack elders, and when you have video footage, when you have social media documenting your every move, those types of actions are alarming just the general population at large.
Tam, you work in the beauty. I mean, you kind of oversee the beauty sector, and then I know you get the noise from that area as well. I mean, and a predominantly, I guess, Asian sector, and you work with Asians. And there are some stereotypes in that field as well. Are you hearing anything of like racial attacks, or more prejudice, or just plain hate like speech, or hate words in general?
Yeah, no, before I go into more specifically my beauty sector, I'd like to talk about just piggybacking on Steve's state data and statistics. So for
Yes,
Nailing
sir.
It for America, we in Orange County, when we partnered with Stop AAPI Hate when we heard the 3,800 in terms of the incidents, hate incidents nationwide against Asians. We also made it more specific for Orange County. As we delved a little bit further into Orange County, we learned from the Orange County District Attorney's Office that there's been more hate incidents in Orange County against Asians in the last 2 years, more than the previous 20 years combined. And then on top of that, we delved a little further in working with the leading agency in Orange County called the Orange County Human Relations Council. So they are a leading voice in aggregating data for Orange County when it comes to hate crimes. And the Orange County Human Relations Council found that from 2019 to our COVID 2020 year, there was a 1,000% increase in hate incidents against Asians. That's a tenfold increase, unbelievable. So we know from that data that in my heart, I know that yes, it's related to COVID-19. Yes, it's related to us being Asian American and looking the way we do with our, in terms of being blamed for the coronavirus. Yes, I know that I was called chink, nip, gook, and slanted eyes and dog eater growing up as mean, nasty names, but now I'm being called coronavirus. My mom, when she walked out to a park along with her Asian elderly Tai Chi group friends, they said, they were telling her, go back to where you're from. You brought the virus here, you know? And so when my mom, that happens to my 76-year-old mom here in Orange County, I know this is problematic. So I just wanted to build on that in terms of my fellow panelists. Now, going back to my industry, the beauty industry, yeah, this is our industry. You know, when you think about nail salons or you think about massage therapy places, when you think about esthetician skincare spas, this is Asian American. I mean, when you think of how many, you know, Asian Americans, women, Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, etc., are in the personal care service industry, this is the industry that gave an opportunity for the next wave of Asian American professionals that become mayors and doctors, lawyers, engineers, and the leaders that we see today in our generation. These are our moms and aunts. So it's been devastating for me to see not only how difficult it's been for our small businesses, our personal care service industry, but then it was most alarming, even after watching all the videos of our Asian females or Asian elderly being pushed, shoved, and killed. It hit really home for me in my industry when we heard about the shootings of 8 killed in the Atlanta massacre, and that 6 were Asian American females in our spa industry. That's been devastating, Young. And yes, beyond that, right after that, guess what? 3 nail salons of Asian American owned last week got a nasty, vile, vicious letter, and that letter is filled with profanity that says "go home." It brought out every nasty word in terms of these salon owners receiving it. I'm friends with one of them here in Riverside, and she said, "Oh my gosh!" Now Jackie said, "Oh my gosh!" Now my mom, she's devastated reading this, and the fellow other salons are Asian American. We're scared now. We're scared. We're getting hit with this nasty, vile letter. It's the same letter going up and down California to our nail salons. In fact, Alex and I had a chance with CNN to discuss it at the Koreatown rally recently.
You know, I hear of these things that are happening, and I've experienced certain amounts of, I guess, Asian American hate or hate speech. You know, being called a nip or something like that. That's, you know, it's just so standard. I'm just kind of like whatever's right. But as a person that carries myself in a very American way, and also dresses American, I don't really get any as much as I think other people. But I think we're talking about the senior citizens and the women. I think the vulnerable. I think those are the people that are most at risk. And you did mention the mass shooting in Atlanta that did leave 8 dead. And let me direct this one question at Tammy, just because of the fact that there were more women victims who fell victim to it. And although there seems to be a certain racial motive, they're not too quick to say that it is a racist hate crime, or they're not trying to label it. Why are they, you know, kind of tiptoeing around this in a way? I mean, what do you think about what's going on in that whole incident?
This is an example of racism, clear cut racism, because first of all, I was watching that press conference as it was happening live, and I was shocked and mortified at what I was seeing, where they actually humanized the perpetrator, showed compassion to the perpetrator, and made it look as though the women were somehow at fault. And when I saw this like happening in front of my very eyes in the year 2021, I was mortified. I canceled every single meeting I had for the entire day and spent the entire day bringing awareness to every single elected representative from Washington, D.C. all the way to California to say, we have got to make sure that this does not become an issue of prostitution, of you name every stereotype. And even on my own Facebook page and Twitter, hearing about, well, this is really about sex trafficking, and trying to turn the narrative around. And so, I've been very active in making sure that the narrative of what happened in Atlanta did not turn into victim blaming. And that is what I had seen. And what's really it was very upsetting watching the humanization of the perpetrator and the compassion and the empathy that was shown against him. And had the perpetrator been a person of color, would they have shown the same compassion and empathy had it been a Black person or a brown person who had committed that crime? And what we hear a lot about are the Black on Asian crimes, which are only 5% of all the crimes against the Asian American community. 90% are perpetrated by white people against the Asian American community, but yet the narrative continues that it is Black on Asian crimes. But going back to the women in Atlanta, it just showed what we as Asian American women, what we know as our own experience in our own Asian fetish, yellow fever. When we have to describe a white man as whether or not he's got yellow fever, like, it's a thing, right? It's taking like what we know as our own reality as Asian American women in this country is, we're always looking out for, does this guy really like me, or does he have yellow fever? There's always that clarification of a white man. And that is the life that Asian women have to go through. And it just turned into and manifested in this different way of, mass murder and, a massacre basically. And, the hate towards Asian women and the fetishization and hypersexualization of Asian women started even before the Chinese Exclusion Act. Before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, there was the Page Act of 1875, which excluded Asian women from coming into this country because they were thought to be here for immoral purposes, quote unquote, immoral purposes. And then fast forward, you had the dragon lady stereotype from, Annie Mae Wong in 1931 with The Daughter of the Dragon to The World According to Susie Wong. So these are, the perpetual stereotypes in Hollywood as it relates to Asian American women. So I grew up with like a Susie Wong, like very, fighting against that. And even, a lot of girls today don't even know, The World According to Susie Wong, where all women were subservient prostitutes. And then you had, Full Metal Jacket in the 80s. So it is not uncommon for an Asian woman to hear "Me love you a long time." Like, that is not uncommon. And so, all of this combined, obviously, you're going to come at a head at some point. And in Atlanta, we saw that coming to a major disastrous head. But it's up to all of us to stand guard and be vigilant and to call it for what it is. And Asian fetishization and hypersexualization is racism against us. You're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. So let me direct it to Tam. Tam, do you agree that this was racially motivated and that the authorities are treating this as less than it really is?
We do. I know my colleagues at Nailing It for America in the spa industry and our colleagues, when we talk about this, we've talked about it as a hate crime. This is not okay. The perpetrator, from our lens, when you go out and you have to drive to 3 different locations and you see the victims of that, this is a hate crime. We have been adamant, Nailing It for America, in terms of organizing, that we need to voice out against these hate crimes. We're so proud that our Vice Mayor Tammy Kim, so proud that Alexander Kim representing our district. We're so proud of our Orange County District Attorney and Police Chief. We're so proud of our supervisors who've come to us and joined us in hands in saying, we do not accept any hate crime, and been very vocal about this in the days after that massacre in Atlanta.
And let me direct this one towards Alex and Steve, whichever, both of you guys take this. And the question is regarding, you guys have been around here for a while, in the K-Town and all these different towns, and you've seen firsthand, like, sort of the evolution of Asian American relations in terms of the other minorities and also just life in Los Angeles as in general. The hate crimes and violence against Asian Americans have been in existence for, what would you say, decades, centuries? I mean, in various degrees. Who wants to take that one, Steve or Alexander?
I mean, I'll start. It's been going on for centuries. I mean, if you bring it way back, even beyond the founding of this country, the European powers back then, it was upon other during the colonial adventures of the different powers that literally drew up boundaries for other countries in Africa and Asia. The colonization of Hong Kong. I mean, all of the Pacific Islanders. I mean, you go back, there is this common history of this continuing history of colonialism that could be translated into discrimination of the oppression of the minority groups, whatever they be, whether Asian American, Native American, etc., African American. And Tammy really said it great. The fetishization and the discrimination of all minority groups in Hollywood. It started out with the Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinos. You go on, this different reinforcements of the stereotypes of that.
But it's especially okay for Asian Americans, even when you see movies like, what was that, with Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan, when they go to like the massage parlors and stuff. Hey, you want to come to America? Just, they're not Asian American, but you just see
the Rush Hour movies, exactly. So I mean, part of the one of the questions that you asked before, part of the onus is on us too. It's a cultural issue of the Confucian values of not being emotional, not to show emotions. The common saying of the nail that gets stuck out gets hammered back in, right? And that's part of what contributes to this. Is by I'm not saying blaming all of it on us, but it's the whole East and Western traditional values of not speaking out because you're going to bring shame upon the family. And especially in the Korean culture too, it's the same thing. It's like, why do you even complain about this? All you do is bring attention to yourself. So selfish of your family, right? And you're losing face. So, and the confusion between the first and second generation. You notice a lot of the attacks are upon the first generation and the second generation, but especially the elderly who tend to be first generation, not exclusively. And it's the second generation that's speaking out, or the 1.5 generation, because we have instilled in us, being born or raised in America, American values of speaking out, because the squeaky wheel gets the oil. You know, that's completely different opposite of the nail getting stuck on being hammered back in. It's the opposite. It's like, you need to speak out. You know, a lot of the Asian American civil rights movement came about from, we have to remember their history, from the African American community that started up. There's a reason why we have more voting rights and all this came from the Black community, right? And we need to go back in our history and learn from what Dr. Martin Luther King, and don't forget, he was one of his inspirations for the concept of civil protest, right, was from Mahatma Gandhi, you know, on South Asian of peaceful protest. And knowing the history of the commonalities of the discrimination that this experienced by all minorities historically, from the different acts that, you know, Tammy mentioned, you know, Chinese Exclusion Act. Don't forget the World War II, you know, where Japanese Americans interned in camps. Most of them were born in America, and they were still put in camps because of that history of distrust upon Asian Americans. And part of it is because we're taught to be quiet. But now we're seeing that, not since the LA riots, that's a whole nother subject, but from a national level of speaking out, we can't stay silent anymore.
I absolutely agree with Alex. This has been around for decades and longer, for that matter. But I think one of the main reasons that this is happening and we haven't heard is the whole notion of model minority men. There are these stereotypes against the Asian American communities that we're all very, you know, intelligent, we're all very wealthy, we're just, you know, model citizens. That is not the case. Yes, there are successful folks, and many of our esteemed panelists are very successful in their respective industries, but there are many folks in our community that are struggling, that are, you know, the pandemic has hit them hard, they're on food stamps and etc. And there's these stereotypes as well. But the other issue is, why we haven't heard until today, is that the issue of representation. For many years, Asian American community has not been represented at different levels of government, different levels of corporate America. And it took 2020 to have the first Korean American women in Congress. It just took that long. And 2 years before that, we've had our first Korean American member of Congress since in the 90s. So we're having these struggles in the political realm. So finally, we have people in power that are voicing their support for us. So we have many members of Congress. We have many, we have our vice mayor here in Southern California. We have other folks in corporate America that are helping to stand in solidarity with our community. So I feel that that's really helping to bring the issue to the forefront, and I am grateful for that.
And sorry if I can interject, and I want to add to this because I want to go back to the data part that Steve had mentioned and tying that to representation, because the city of Irvine is and will be, or actually is, because it's already launched, the first and only city in Orange County that's doing its own hate crime and hate incident tracking. So prior to my coming on board and being elected, any hate incident tracking went to like OC Human Relations or another nonprofit organization. And as a result, a city with over half its residents of Asian American descent had no idea what the amount of hate crimes and hate incidents that were happening right here in the city of Irvine. We had a police department that really did not know what was happening because they were hearing it maybe 1 or 2 quarters later. They had no idea that Stop API Hate already had 11 hate incidents reported in the city of Irvine, but somehow they didn't get that information. So come January, my first city council meeting, like the first real one, I initiated, and it was approved unanimously by the Irvine City Council, for the city of Irvine and the Irvine Police Department to do its own tracking and monitoring of hate incidents. And we've created a portal which will be multi-language, multilingual, so that way we can work with our partners such as Stop API Hate, OC Human Relations, and pass the information that way, rather than the other way, having nonprofits and then us getting that information as a city. And that will help us with a variety of things. And it was just shocking that, like, at a local municipal level, that there was that much of just lack of understanding what was happening, and the fear in our community that many community members were faced with when it came to that. And so, I'm really proud to have been able to implement something like that. But again, that happens with representation. When you have people being elected from the community and then serving in elected offices because they know what's happening at the ground level, at the grassroots level, and what's, the pain our seniors, our women, our children are suffering from. And it's having that knowledge and then applying it to policy making, this, in a policy making role. That is so critical to Steve's point. And I'm not saying that because I'm an API elected official.
I think you guys have all made like really, really valid points that are opening up eyes in just different directions. But there's several overwhelming themes. And these themes include, representation, also not speaking out, or that passive East Asian Confucian mentality of being the submissive or that kind of stuff there. And it is a fact. It is one of the things that is plaguing us. But another thing that I think I want to just kind of bring into the limelight is, because of linguistic matters, I think us Asian Americans have a trouble uniting the Vietnamese American community, the Chinese American community, the Japanese American community, the Korean American community. We've all been segregated amongst ourselves, just like the way we are in Asia. And I've been to Asia. I spent 20 years there, and I know that there's racism against each other as well. But because of the linguistic factors that exist between us and amongst us, we have some trouble getting together. Now, is this a factor of us communicating with each other as Asian Americans? We're all in the same boat, we're fresh off the boat, as they say, right? So is that a factor as well as communicating with other minority groups and being more immersed in community activities as, us 2.0 generations or 1.5 generations are better to do? What are your thoughts? Let's talk about that. I think that's also a thing as well.
I'll go first. I absolutely agree. Unlike some of the other minority groups, AAPI umbrella, we speak so many different languages. And we're seeing many of our attacks being targeted to first generation where they are monolingual, whether they're monolingual Chinese, Korean, etc. And I think it's sort of a complicated issue where some of the issues in the homeland or the motherland comes to America, where when we are trying to unite under a single AAPI umbrella, some of those older tensions come up. Whether that's the long, decades-long tension between Korea and Japan and China and et cetera. I think those are some of the barriers that we have to overcome. But like many of our panelists have mentioned, the 1.5 second, third generations are stepping up. And I don't think those tensions mean that much to the younger generation, to the folks that have been educated here in America. And I want to encourage all the listeners and all of our fellow Asian American brothers and sisters, and especially within the Korean American space, because I'm Korean American, that this isn't somebody else's problem. This isn't just the Chinese Americans or the Vietnamese Americans' problem, but it's all of our issues. So we have to unite and speak up against it.
Yeah, and just to add to what Steve's saying, it's true. The idea, and this is what a lot of mainstream needs to understand, is that the whole idea of AAPI or Asian American even, or this Pan-Asian, it doesn't exist in my parents' point of view. From my parents' perspective, you are Korean or you're not Korean. That's it. and understanding the power of of joining hands, and even then, the 동야인. So then they understand, okay, the concept here in America of maybe Chinese, Japanese, perhaps Vietnamese, Korean getting together, but then they don't really see any commonality on the PI side or even for South Asians. They look at that as a completely different race of people, not even anything related. And so, it's getting through that. And also, another thing I want to talk about or mention just real briefly is I've had to train my parents to not refer to people as American, 미국 사람, when they're referring to white people. Because, and I know we all say American because we're talking, they're trying to explain or express, like they're actually talking about a white person, and then they use the term American, and I have to like train them to basically, if they want to say white, but not say, oh, that's a Black person, that's a Korean person, that's a Vietnamese person, and oh, that's an American person. And really changing the language as well for the first generation. And I'm sure, Tam can probably speak to this. I think the, first generation, even Vietnamese, it's the same, using the same terminology. So I guess I see you're shaking your head, so I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, Tammy, we do. My parents do the same thing. We say "Mỹ," and "Mỹ" means American, and when we refer to American, it's the white American. And so so there's an opportunity to obviously to work with our parents on that. I wanted to talk about this language barrier and our divisions in community. Obviously, in Orange County, two of the largest AAPI communities is the Korean and the Vietnamese community. I can't help but think back to 2009 when I became chairman of the Vietnamese American Chamber of Commerce, and I got to work with my counterpart, JJ Kim, the chairman of the Korean American Chamber of Commerce. And our conversation started like this: how come our two chambers have never worked together or had an event together or done anything together? And we both came to the same conclusion. It's because my predecessor did the entire board with Vietnamese, and they conducted all the meetings in Vietnamese. And he said, well, the Korean American Chamber of Commerce in Orange County, they conduct all of their meetings in Korean. So of course there's not only a language gap, there's a cultural gap. And so we both made it a point to, let's do an Asian Business Expo together. How about the next board meeting for the Korean Chamber of Commerce? We host the Vietnamese board in the Korean Business District over some great Korean food. And then I committed, yes, I would like to invite the entire Korean board to Little Saigon and break bread over some Vietnamese food. And we started that, and it's really helped. By the way, Alex Kim was the first ever Korean American on the Vietnamese Chamber board, and he continues to serve on the Vietnamese American Chamber Commerce Board over the past decade since I was chairman, and we're three chairs and presidents into it. And Alex continues to be our leading voice for government and community relations. He's always seen things from an AAPI perspective, even as a Korean American serving on the Vietnamese American Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure he's had to explain that many a times. But saying that just goes to show there's just so much opportunity when we link up, and I can't help but take a step back and look at today, and I'm like, wow, I'm on this awesome panel with all these fellow Asian Americans, Korean Americans who are leaders, and we're doing it on English. And then I see our host, Young Kim. I'm like, okay, honestly, over 100 interviews I've done for Asian ethnic, it's all been in Vietnamese. This is my first in English from an Asian host. So times are changing. Obviously, that's progress. For us to all come together and articulate our thoughts in English on such a heavy subject matter, I could share with you 1 year ago, if you would have asked me to do this on this subject matter, I would have said, no, thank you. I politely declined because I'm from a family and from a culture that says, keep your head down. Let's stick in. We're small business owners. Stick to your business. Let's just pay the bills and let's stay out of the way. We do not we do not need to be the face of a victim. We do not need to be the face of talking about hate crimes. This is in racism. These are heavy, heavy topics that we in our own family didn't discuss growing up. So let alone discussing it on a platform like this. So thank you.
I'd like to add also to what Tim said. It's definitely, I want to thank it's leaders like Asian American leaders like Dr. Tammy Nguyen to be thinking from a bigger AAPI umbrella angle. He brought me on board on the Vietnamese American Chamber. It's true. Most of the people that actually question me for being on the Vietnamese American Chamber are first generation. you know, particularly from the Korean chamber. And there was like, you should be on our board. Why are you on the Vietnamese chamber board? So, it's the thoughts. And some second generation that's really cool. They're like praising me, and I always thank Tam for doing that. And now we have another Korean American that joined the board recently on the Vietnamese chamber. It's things like that where the next generation takes the onus on. And to all the listeners, I'm sure there are people out there that also are intermarried with either other Asian Americans or non-Asian Americans. There's studies have shown that there has been a high amount of intermarriage it's mostly between other Asian Americans that's happening. It's something that's a narrative that should be really emphasized, because it only encourages more Asian Americans to work together. And in the 20 years I've been working in various positions of government and nonprofit and business, it's something that I've been personally observing, and it's been supported by the data provided by our local universities. And definitely, I encourage the radio show to also invite folks from academia. You have many Asian American professors from the local universities from Los Angeles, Riverside, and Orange County. Of course, coming from UC Irvine, we have a great handful, part of the Korean alumni chapter, but you have a lot of both corporations and academia focusing on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think Steve Kang alluded to it, the importance of, the lack of having diverse boards. Even there's a tension between in the Wall Street right now. There was an initiative by NASDAQ to require a person of color on their boards, but is being right now challenged by the powers that be in the conservative movement, as well as like, why is government meddling into the affairs of business, right? But the truth of the matter is, if you don't do that, this is the reason why we have attack crimes upon minority groups. Bring it down locally to the Huntington Beach. There's flyers being posted everywhere. I'm getting texts from friends that live in Huntington Beach, which is in our district, of White Lives Matter flyers. They're going to have an event in April 10th this weekend in Huntington Beach, on the pier of having such things. And law enforcement and local officials are well aware of it, but there's a freedom of speech, right? That can't be interfered to. We have to understand about the Bill of Rights and all the things that happen. So the onus is definitely on the next generation that have a greater grasp of the English language, of course, full grasp of it, and to lead the efforts. But still, even now, even my parents told me, don't go to that protest, the AAPI protest, because of the danger. It's not so much the shame, but the safety, right? I mean, that could be something what the parents just concerned because they see all the attacks and they're really worried about even my safety. So, but I said, Mom, we got to do this, because if we don't, they'll continue on this. We need more awareness of this. So go ahead, Young.
Well, I think unity is definitely one thing. I think it's kind of funny because I'm a product of the 90s, the 92 riots was kind of one of the turning points of my life. It affected me in a way I kind of really took things the wrong way, in the worst way possible, right? And I remember just feeling empowered when being with groups of kind of gangsterish Asian friends. I felt empowered. I felt like one of the best feelings about that was no one's going to call me a nip. No one's going to call me flat face. No one's going to disrespect me and think I'm a math equation solving nerd. Those are some of the things that affected me, I think. And it's kind of scary to see that it's kind of carried over now. We thought it was kind of hidden. Everything was blanketed over, but it's been there this whole time. And that unity thing, I think it's very important. I think even right now, when I see amongst the panel, there's a formula for like a big old like Vietnamese and Korean American, lunar festivities block party or something with some K-pop artists or something. Maybe you guys should come up with something like that in the city of Irvine. I'll bring the entertainment, I promise, right? But regardless, we need this unity, I think. And I think we're all beginning to see that the Asian American community needs to come together and be united and to understand one another as our friends and neighbors, and we're on the same boat, just like I said. What kind of education do you think is needed moving forward? What do you think needs to be done? What do you think needs to be changed amongst the AAPI community in order for us to be more united, to have a bigger voice, and to be one, and to be heard and not be stepped on?
So I just want to add a couple of ideas to this. So, when we look at ethnic media, when we look at our own Korean media, and Steve can really speak to this, Korean media, like whether it's the newspapers or news, they really only care about what happens to other Koreans. So, and I think it's going to be really important to broad out for ethnic media, whether it's the Vietnamese, Chinese, or Korean, to really look at things from a more pan-Asian perspective. And I think that would really help. And I think Steve can probably elaborate more on that. But, from an education standpoint, whether it's this, COVID-19 situation now, or something else 5 years, 10 years, 6 months down the line, it will never be solved so long as we are looked at as foreigners, as we are looked at as the other. And the only way that's really going to solve this is to make sure that our stories, the Asian American stories, are woven into the curriculum of schools. And without ethnic studies, and without, really understanding the history of Asians in America and our contributions to this country, we will always be viewed as foreigners, whether now or later down the road. And so that's my big push for ethnic studies.
And
Can I segue? What Tammy Kim was so important, I failed to mention about the importance of ethnic studies. And from the state legislature level, I know, having worked for Governor Schwarzenegger, we've always been, throughout history, legislatively, there's always been a push to add more to the education of the history of our country. And even from experience, Young and everyone else on this panel, that the stories of the contributions of the minorities has been definitely lacking in the history books. I mean, I could narrow down, I remember Japanese internment stories in like one paragraph, it's that lacking. Or, the reason why in the picture when you had Transcontinental Railroad building, there was both Irish laborers and Chinese laborers, but during the photograph of when they joined in the East and West, they kicked out all the Chinese labor and only the Irishmen were there, right? That's interesting history about another minority group who's been here longer oppressing another recently arriving minority group. So that's something where we are, from our state assembly side, Assemblyman Peter Norris, we're pushing for ethnic studies, working closely with the API caucus and other caucuses, Black and Latinos, to make sure that we push for the history and contribution of minority groups, including Asian American and Pacific Islanders, to the history of not just California, but to the United States. So we'll continue that fight and make everyone aware of what we're doing, working closely with our local leaders like Vice Mayor Tammy Kim of Irvine.
I agree. Like, we definitely need to help push for Asian American curriculum to be added into our public school textbooks. I think it's been way too long for that to happen, but also it'll take all of us here on the panel and all those that are listening to help raise awareness and educate our community. Like Tammy mentioned, with some of our own community biases, where in the beginning, when these issues were popping up in Oakland and New York City, I really wanted the Korean language media to, report about it, raise awareness to the greater Korean American population. But the response I got from them is like, it's Oakland, it's Chinese Americans, it's different Asian American community. It's not coming to Koreatown. Don't worry, Steve. And then when it finally did happen in Koreatown, that's when people are like, oh my God, so Steve, what happened in Oakland? What happened in New York City? That should not be happening. We should be unified, and it'll take all of us to help kind of push within our networks and our friends and family to make that happen. And also on the legislative front, many politicians are giving, very strong worded statements. I believe statements are great first step, but we want to see legislative actions at all levels of government. So we have our vice mayor taking action in Irvine, but we need it at the county level, we need it at the state level, as well as in Washington, D.C. So it was very heartwarming for me to see the president, establishing a special task force related to API hate. But I want to see the details. So what is this task force going to do? And we just have to push as a community to make sure that these folks are held accountable.
Yeah, I wanted to continue and build upon the discussion in the unity. This is our time. Our time is now. We do not need to be invisible anymore. This is not okay for us to let this opportunity go by and not unite. As we talk about education, I can't help but think at UCI, we have, obviously Alex leading the alumni chapter there, but we have Professor Linda Vo, who's been a champion the last 2 decades. And she is at UC Irvine. She is an Asian American stalwart. She was over in the College of Humanities. She has been an advocate and she's been a connector. And then her counterpart over at Cal State Fullerton, Professor Eliza No, who's half Korean, half Vietnamese. She has been an incredible advocate, a PhD for Asian American studies. She continues to chair Asian American studies in bringing these studies. And then that's obviously in the College of Humanities. But you know what? This is what I know. It's hard. It's hard being an academic. It's hard going against the grain. It's hard trying to get our Asian American brothers and sisters and our parents to say, don't be a doctor, don't be a lawyer, go to humanities, study the humanities, study Asian American studies. It's very, very hard. I do believe that it has to start from K through 12. We have to have honest conversations from K through 12 throughout. I know when I went through K through 12, I hated history. It just wasn't an appealing subject. And all I learned about is American war. It was a black and white, history for me in America, growing up in the American system through public schools, K through 12. I didn't enjoy history. I never found anything fascinating. The first time I enjoyed history was an undergraduate student at UC Irvine when I got to take Asian American studies. I took a course called Vietnamese American Experience. I'm like, wow, that defined me as a refugee. That defined me as an immigrant. I finally knew where we as a number fell into. I could not connect on any other American history. I finally knew that we were part of the first wave after the Vietnam War. I learned about the boat refugees. I learned about the humanitarian operation. I finally felt counted in the history books in that class. That mattered to me. I felt like an American with history at that point. I also know it's very challenging. We are all in our lanes, whether it's in media, whether it's in nonprofit, whether it's in government, whether it's in the private sector. We need more intersect. You know what? This May, it comes up again, Asian American Heritage Month. We have an opportunity here because of this issue, because of anti-Asian hate at its peak and at its height. We need to not tiptoe anymore and just let's continue to feed in the model minority myth. Here's the next successful Asian business owner. Here's the next successful doctor. Here's the next successful entrepreneur. If we just continue to do that and tiptoe it and not face head on this anti-Asian, we will continue to be invisible. We are power in numbers. If we don't unite, when united, we are the fastest growing ethnic segment. We need to learn from our Hispanic Latinx predecessors. They're made of a bunch of countries too. Look at how many Spanish speaking countries are in Central America and South America. And here they are called Hispanic, Latinx, the largest minority in America, the largest minority in Orange County. They make up 1.2 million of our 3.2 million. Asian Americans, we need to unite. It's a call out to unite. We need power in numbers. We will not get funded. We will not get represented. We will not have a seat at the table, whether it's in government, corporations, or business, if we don't unite. Thank you.
Amen.
All right, thank you. We're gonna leave it here, and we're almost out of time. Is there anyone that wants to add something before I go to Tammy for some final words? I'm gonna leave it to you because you're the only woman here.
I mean, a lot of this, there's, we see sort of the intersection between, racism and misogyny and, looking at other peoples of color And really, I just want to add for all the listeners here that, when we talk about our struggles as Asian Americans, we're not in this struggle alone. There's the Black and brown brothers and sisters are also struggling as well. And when we live in a world where we view ourselves, not all of us here on this call, but many of us in the Asian American community, when we live in this world of white adjacency, and kind of feeding into the white supremacy and really not understanding our own privilege and falsely thinking that we have privilege and not realizing that our privilege is lent to us by white people. So whatever privilege we hold is not really ours, but it's whatever the powers that be. And so when we're protesting against affirmative action, but yet, and we accuse Black and brown people of taking our spots in colleges, and yet how can we cry and complain in the injustice that we're not on corporate boards? So we have to look at things in a very, future forward way. And so, the bamboo ceiling exists. Only 1% of Fortune 500 executives are Asian American, and even a smaller portion of those are East Asian and Southeast Asian within Fortune 500 companies. And we have to look at that. So instead of complaining and crying about the fact that your college spots, which is not true, by the way, are being taken by Black and brown people, let's think about where we are in many different facets. Let's think about, the systematic racial injustice that exists in the procurement section when it comes to government contracts, that we don't have a leg up on, and that we need affirmative action to get us on corporate boards. We need all of that in order to help us. So I just want to put that out there, and I'll let and thank you for having me here and inviting me and actually just having this discussion. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. And Steve or Alexander, do you guys have anything to add to that? Or do you guys want to plug whatever you'd like to plug real quick?
Yes, absolutely. So many folks around me have commented and messaged me saying, like, Steve, I think the momentum is dying out. So, we can't let this momentum die out. Just like what Tam said earlier, I think it's our time. The world is noticing our community. The world is talking about our issues at the forefront. So it is critical that we all participate and we engage. And I want to encourage all of us. Asian Americans are perceived as one of the least engaged communities in America, whether in terms of civic engagement or other types of engagement, and that needs to change. And there are important elections coming up in LA and Orange County this year, so please make your voices heard, and please stay with us as we stand for this.
All right, Alex?
Yes, so definitely thank you for the opportunity. So one of the ways to definitely get more engaged for our listeners is, if you have an interest in serving in public office or wanting to know more about that, there's opportunities to be interns. That's how I started in government. Many people that work in elected offices or become elected start off as interns. So definitely visit our website. If you Google search AD, like Apple, Apple Dam or Apple Dog, sorry, 74, AD74, you'll see our website, and there's please email right there to show an interest. All their elected offices also have opportunities for internships, whether it's be in the summertime. High school and college sometimes have different requirements, but it's a great way to learn what our elected officials do at all levels, whether it be the local city level. I'm sure Tammy Kim's office, they may have internship opportunities as well, but also at the county, state, and federal elected offices. So that's one way to be a part of helping out our Asian American community. Thank you.
Tam?
Just wanted to thank you very much, Young Kim. Awesome, esteemed panelists. This discussion is much needed. Let's continue to amplify our voices and unite. Thank you.
Thank you, Tam. And last but not least, Tammy.
I think I kicked it off, so I'll just kind of leave it there. But, again, thanks for bringing us to the table and having this discussion. I think it's really critical. It's very timely. And I just want to just echo Steve's point. It doesn't end here, and it needs to continue. And it also will help donating to our Asian American nonprofits and our community-based organizations. So whether it's, where I'm at, Korean Community Services, KYCC, OKAPACA, it's really important to invest in API community organizations, because we get pennies on the dollar compared to what mainstream organizations get. So please invest directly in your Asian American community-based organizations.
All right. Tammy, thank you very much for joining us today. Everyone, that was Tam Nguyen, founder of Nailing It for America, president of Advanced Beauty College, joining us, as well as Alexander Kim, district director, California Assembly 74, Steve Kang, vice president of Korean Federation of Los Angeles and director of KYCC, and the voice that you just heard, Tammy Kim, city council member and vice mayor city of Irvine, joining us today. And thank you so much for joining us. I think this was really a topic that we do need to talk about. We need to keep going out there and talk about regularly to find solutions to getting our voices heard. Thank you.